Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our second session. My name is Barsha, and I work with the Breakthroughs Media team. And it's immense pleasure that we have launched the report today, and something we have been working for a very long time. And we have this amazing panel coming up in the second half. So I'll request Richa to play this video. We wanted to show you just a kind of a recap of the whole thing, and then we'll start with our panel discussion. Thank you, Richa. Thank you very much. We'll start with the panel discussion. So today's discussion topic of discussion is decoding bystander behavior and the role of social biases. So those of you have were attending the first half of the today's launch, you have gone through the report in much detail. And while doing the study, we realized that this whole bystander action is not something very linear. It's not something, something happens in front of our eyes, and then, basically you go and that triggers you and go and you start intervening. But also we have seen that how our social biases, our biases about caste, gender, religion, class, plays role in taking an active measure. And we're going to decode this entire thing, and we will see that how biases plays role. And we have this amazing panel with us. I'll request all the panelists to please switch on your camera. And I'll just introduce our audience to all of you. So we have Ashwini, Dr. Ashwini KP. She's an assistant professor in St. Joseph College, Bangalore, and she's also co-founder of Zaria, a Women's Alliance for Dignity and Equality. Ashwini, if you can. Okay, yeah. We have Pavel Sagolsem, who's a storyteller, who's a vagabond at heart, who a feminist in practice. Z is a founding partner of the Chinky Homo project and has worked on diverse issues of sex, gender, and sexuality. Welcome, Pavel. We have Bisma, a very young feminist with us, who's a gender-sensitive trainer with Breakthrough India, and also an advocate of gender equality, gender sensitivity, and women's rights. Welcome, Bisma. We have Omkar. Omkar is an architect and community development professional, a fundraiser for social cause, and a very, very keen traveler. And Omkar was also one of the respondent of our study, who was part of the study and shared his experience and why he intervened. Um, Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for joining this discussion. And it's an immense pleasure that we all come together and discuss that when you talk about bystander intervention, how it's important to look back on our biases when we are acting on something. So I'll without much getting into the context, because we have been discussing this since morning. Um, we actually wanted to like the first the question, and I will I'll start with Bisma. Is that okay, Bisma?
Yes, that is fine.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So the very first question is like, have you yourself ever experienced where you have been an active bystander, or you have seen anyone being an active bystander? If you can share that with us.
Yes, yes. I want to share one incident. So, some days back, I was traveling in metro and I saw that there was a woman who was standing and there was a man who was standing behind her and he was trying to touch her repeatedly. So, I saw that the woman was really uncomfortable and I saw that and I went to them and I asked the man to back off. I told him, see, you are making her uncomfortable. Why don't you just stay away? So that woman gave me a smile. And the man, of course, he um, went away from there. And we got off on the same station. And the woman told me, it is the first time like I have seen this part, this side of Muslims. She said this thing to me. So like this made me realize that intervention, I intervened, it helped in de-escalating the situation as well as somewhere it helped to change the stereotype about the whole community. That was the thing.
Thank you, Bisma. I'll go with the same question. Omkar. Omkar, you have to unmute.
Yeah. So the similar experience what Bisma shared, I experienced something similar. So I was traveling in a crowded bus in Bombay, and usually what we see is there are some seats reserved for women in front. Okay, so even if the bus is crowded, usually men don't stand next to those seats because there are ladies sitting. So it's uncomfortable for both the genders. So most of the time, people like men don't prefer to stand there. Okay, so it was a crowded bus. I was standing behind like the back of the bus, and I saw that the one guy was standing close to one of that seat, and he was touching his body on that lady's shoulder. Okay, and that lady was quite uncomfortable, and she was shifting away from that
Omkar's.
and then I realized that that lady. Hello.
Yeah, Omkar, your voice kind of broke in between. We could not hear exactly what you said, like the last 30 seconds.
Yeah. Is it better now? Yeah. So I was saying that that lady was shifting away from that guy. After observing this for almost minutes, I thought of action because I realized that a lot of other people were also noticing it, but nobody was taking any action. The first thought came into my mind was, will it be safe for me? Okay, being a bystander and interviewing something because that guy, I guess he was on heavy drugs or something. And the similar incident once I was mapping some homeless people in Bombay, and I had visited one of the a very shady area in Bombay for the survey. And that time I saw one guy who took out a blade from his mouth, and then I got a cut on my hand. So that incident came into my mind where I thought this guy is familiar to that person. So I was thinking whether it will be safe or not. But I thought, okay, let's do it. And I intervened. I asked that I am seeing what you are doing. So he said, I'm not doing anything. मैंने कुछ भी नहीं किया. So I asked that lady, did you feel anything? Are you uncomfortable? And then she said yes. So after that, when that lady said yes, I was uncomfortable. More 2-3 guys came in support, and then the conductor came, and we asked bus driver to stop the bus, and we asked that person to got down. So that was the moment when I realized, if one person has to, take some kind of action or take some kind of a stance, and there are other people, can come forward to support. So that was one of the incidents that I wanted to share.
Thank you, Omkar. I'll come to Pavel. If you want to share any incident you have experienced.
Can you hear me? All right. Okay. Um. So many one or two experiences that I want to bring to this discussion. One is something that happened at home in Manipur. This was when I was back in this was when I was back at home for a vacation. And what happened is in the night, in the locality, we heard a commotion outside when a women sort of like started banging the gate of of certain people in the locality. So in Manipur, what happens is everybody goes to sleep. If it's a locality, like not a really a market area, everybody goes to sleep by 9 or 10. It was around 10 o'clock or something, and then this women started banging the door. So at first hand, I remember how locality people got a little worried because again Manipur is a place where there's a lot of violence that happens, so people got a little worried to go out and help that is there, as I think I was also part of the discussion in the first half today where people were talking about, like when you become part of a certain violence, you're also afraid that the violence might also like turn towards you. But I think the confidence that people had of stepping out in the street was because we heard the call of a woman, you know. So at least one could say that it's not a brawl between, say, police and boys or, something like that. It's about the women. So all of us stepped out. Um, so what I'm trying to bring is a bit problematic here in the sense that all of us stepped out from our homes because we heard a call of a woman. But and then we saw that a woman was struggling with this group of men, apparently. Um, a group of men, she was struggling with her, with a group of men. And I remember all locality people out, we all came out from our houses, opened the gate, and we saw what's happening in the street. At that moment, what the hassle that was happening between the women and the men stopped. And that's when people started asking what's happened, and 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 what was quite curious was what the curious turn of the events was basically the fact that one can totally see that the men was trying to impose themselves against these women. We don't know what was happening, the women was insisting the women to get onto this car in front of their houses, and she came with us and we are having a bit of a argument over here, and there's nothing else happening. So let me also point out the fact that it was the Meitei community. It was predominantly a Meitei community, and the women in question was not from Meitei community. I don't remember if she was a Naga or a Kuki, but she was not a Meitei per se. And as according to her, like she said that she doesn't want to go with this man, and she wants us to help. But the point is, um, what I'm trying to bring is like suddenly people, instead of really questioning those men about why they are trying to force the women into a car, and let's also consider the fact that this is happening in the night. Okay, people started questioning the women that why is she out there in the night and why is she there alone. And that became a moment of contentions between me and the locality member, because I step out and I was like, it doesn't matter what she was doing and why she was out here alone. The point is that we have to save her from these men. But at the same time, a lot of locality members started shouting from behind my back, like from the people wouldn't come up in front and say things because they feel like, issues of sex and sexuality are taboo, so they don't want to speak it in front of their sisters and their mothers and goodness what. But then a lot of people, even including women, started talking about how she deserves it. And then everybody was like, okay, if she's out in the night like this, she must be a sex worker, you know, and she deserves it. That, and I was like, doesn't matter whether she's a sex workers or not, whether these people are her clients or not. The fact that something is happening, like she doesn't agree with them right now, and she wants protection and safety from us. That is what is important. I remember having a big hullabaloo fight with the people out there. And during, it was the time when I had also started transitioning. I was for a very long time, I people know me as this effeminate gay person, but I had started transitioning. And back in Delhi, I wasn't, I mean, I, as I said, I was in Delhi and I went home for vacation. So back in Delhi, I had all this freedom to dress or whatever I want to, but in locality, I was sort of picking up on small little things, you know, like putting on the makeup, little bit of makeup. I hadn't really fully just like feminize myself in front of the community, but I was also finding my way to do it once that I've come out. So the next thing was after they started, after they started, so it was very, like the moment became initially, had she been a Manipuri Meitei woman, I don't think people will start questioning their character, because people, we don't do it, especially when the women or the victim belongs to our own community. Then we don't do a lot of this questioning. But because she was a non-Meitei woman, people started questioning a lot, about their character and blah blah blah. They also bring in this a lot of myth about how Naga people and Kuki people are different from Meitei people, and all of those started coming in, why we should actually be defending somebody from another community. Second thing is, it was not just about defending. Why get into this mess at all? And then next came in the question of like, who, again, fine, this is a women. Then what sort of women is it? Up from the cultural like category, and then sort of assessing that person's character through the cultural profile of the community that she belongs to taking to going on to women, characters of, again, categorizations of women into good women and bad women. And this came up. The next thing is, again, who is in support of these women came up. And in this, and here I am, the visibly queer person in support of these women. And again, in Manipur, queer people are also not really seen from a good light. They're seen as sexually perverted people. So this was what I got to hear, and it was really, I was really heartbroken. So then it also turned towards me, like you, trans person, sexually promiscuous, hence you are able to sympathize with the sex worker. But we, being the respectable people of the community with our respectable jobs and respectable family, we don't stand by her. And like what really shook me, what really got me upset, and I remember crying that day afterwards. That time I had to be strong, because it was not just those boys that I had to stand up against to, but also I had to stand up against the entire community and the locality, including my family members. Because my family, my mom and my dad was, I understand where you're coming. I told to my mom and dad, I was like, are we going to leave her alone here? I will not leave her alone here, because my job and what I stand for will not stop, will not allow me to do that. And I was like, if I'm going to stand here, will you as my parents stand with me as well? My parents stood with me, thank God. But because my parents stood with me that the locality sort of like come on board later on, after all this halla ballu, to finally उसको अपने घर तक पहुंचाने का हमने decision लिया. मगर it is, and what I'm talking about is until that point, when we finally as a group decided to escort her to her safety to our house. So even my parents told me that when defending that women, they were also their fear and their shame about me also reverberated at the same time, because they knew that at some point people are going to call out on me as well, that way. So what really I mean, like, I was really shocked that day, and I was like, how can the society be like this? And I'm talking about a society which is actually officers' colony. It's a colony in Manipur where leading officers in it's a officers' colony in Manipur. So I was like, people who are teaching in university, like university lectures, and people whom the society look up to as this learned people of the society, leading, like who's teaching in university, means you're basically like those people who are holding the beacon for the young people on how to build the world in big learning places like university. And such kind of people are still with their bias, how social biases were still more important to them than the gravity of the situation. At that point, I remember like shouting at them, ki, like, are you because of your biases against a certain group of women, certain type of women, because of your biases against certain community, are you tonight, are all of you willing to take the responsibility for the rape and assault of a women? It was finally when I started shouting this question that people had to really think about like what they had to do. And I'm glad that at least they came on board with me and they decided to escort women. But that whole ordeal just brought out a lot of, I don't know, like it broke a lot of my faith and trust in society and people in general and people belonging to my community and my locality. But it was also, I mean, it's so easy for us who are it's so easy for us who are fairly acquainted with violence against women and all of it to step up like that. But I feel like, I mean, even a university lecturer could not really like go beyond their biases. So this is an instance from Manipur that I want to share. And with this instance, I would like to, the kind of questions that I want to throw up is like the kind of biases we hold in terms of like, in terms of the, say, in terms of if the other person, if the person who is going through is the violent is if the survivor of the person who is undergoing violence is from your own community or not. And at the same time, again, the category of women, categorization of women, good women, bad women. In this also, I want to also bring up this something that I want to attach to it is that if that woman that I was talking about was a cisgender woman, so she is a sex worker, but because she was a cisgender woman, I think people were also a bit more sympathetic towards her. What if she was a transgender woman? And clearly, we all know that if a transgender woman is out in the night with a group of boys, then we can totally imagine like, like she could be a sex worker, she could be out partying with them. But the point, I think, yeah, exactly. Like if she was a transgender woman, then do you think people would have that, even that little sympathy that they had? This is something that I want to throw to the larger audience. Like, we have to, when we talk about violence against women, who are we leaving out? What categories of women are we leaving out? And do they, like, even in our own stand and action again on bystander intervention, like will whether a person is cisgender or transgender, how does it make a difference to us? Whether a person belongs to a certain community, which is so-called, which socially stereotype as loose or promiscuous women, then how will we tackle that? Yeah. I just to add to it, I just feel like today's sharing was really nice to hear about such a lot of bystander. I mean, in India, one thing we know is that bystanders being bystander, and not really intervening, not just in a matter of violence against women, but also in matter of a lot of other things. Even when an accident happens, is something very common here in India, even though we are one of the most populated country in the world. But it was also very hope. I mean, it brings a lot of hope to hear about all those instances of when people had intervened on, and also Omkar also shared and Bisma also shared, just to hear about, like hear all of the stories together about how people, instead of just being a bystander, intervened, and is very very heart lifting. It really lifts the heart. And one thing I keep thinking about is, if you are one thing from my own experience is that when you are a transgender person and when you are not in a city where you were born and you are in a foreign city, when I think about like if anybody will really intervene when I really call out for help, I just feel like a lot of people will just smile and look at me. or even if it's happening to a transgender person, a lot of people generally smile. They don't really intervene. They don't really like step in. Yeah, but why is that? Hi, Ashwini, can you hear me?
Yes, Pavel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Please go ahead because I think there's
Okay.
an
Yeah,
internet
sure,
issue
sure.
with something. So
So
please go
firstly,
ahead.
thank you so much, Pavel. Firstly, I would like to thank Breakthrough for giving me this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel with such wonderful speakers. So coming to the question that Barsha asked me regarding my intervention as a bystander, I think within the purview of the discourse of gender-based violence, bystander response is extremely significant, and in most of the cases, a proactive stance taken by the bystander has largely helped survivors to report their abusers, both in personal as well as public space. And coming to my personal experience, one of the incidents that happened was while I was studying in the university, and then myself and a friend of mine, we were walking around 1 a.m. in the night, and then we saw this boy, this couple who were there who were having a bit of heated argument, and he tried to physically assault her. And myself and my friend, we intervened, and we tried to explain that he can't be doing that, and he was a little cautious, and then he stopped, and we asked him to leave this place, and he left the place, and that was one. The other incident was while I was in Delhi, a friend of mine faced sexual harassment at workplace, and this is a very well-known organization in Delhi. And this friend of mine was relatively young, in her early 20s, and just had stepped out from her hometown, and it was her first time in Delhi, and she was unable to comprehend what was happening because one of her colleague was trying to send her certain inappropriate messages to her. And myself and another friend, we tried to kind of help her out if she wants to report it, and she did raise a complaint, an official complaint with the organization, and it was extremely traumatizing for her. One of the reason was most of them at workplace were not supportive to her, were very, they treated the case in a very frivolous manner. And after a couple of months, it was taken by the head of the organization, around 3 to 4 members. And unfortunately, this is a space where we consider it to be a safe space, human rights organization, progressive space. And what happened was, the survivor was intimidated. She was asked questions like as to why she took so many months to report. She took a month or so to report, but she was so traumatized that she in fact told me that she would never work with civil society groups. So despite we tried to support her, but the way in which organization institutions also respond, it has a major impact on how survivors, how survivors get that help, get that assistance when they face abuse, be it in an institution or in a public space. So but otherwise, if we look at the interventions, particularly in terms of bystander, this has largely, the way in which generally, if I have seen even in my close quarters within my friends, family, acquaintances, most of them, at least 70 to 80% of them, are extremely open minded, and they don't give a second thought in providing that assistance or to stand by the survivors. That's what I have seen, and fortunately have been amongst people who have been like that. And but however, at the end of the day, there are a lot of serious gaps, the way in which these issues are raised in spaces of authority, or in spaces of a formal structural institutional space. So that is a reason that at the end of the day, if a survivor has to face a brunt of reporting a case, or if even if a bystander is standing by a survivor, it will not materialize the way it has to. So yeah.
Thank you, Ashwini. Thank you a lot. And sorry, we were having some glitches, and I went offline. So I am connecting from other this thing. Meanwhile, we try to fix the thing. Very interestingly, while listening to Bisma, Omkar, you, and Pavel, there is this whole bit of this whole she deserves it, or she is not from my community. Or this entire biases of like a good Muslim and bad Muslim, and you know. So that kind of brings us to this whole next point of which I think we mostly covered. All of you actually have covered, like that the whole perception of you as an intervener by the survivor, and how basically all of you actually spoke about that, how this whole the social identity plays a role. So actually, the same question now in a different way, that when you were part of some kind of violence, where you have faced a violence, what was others reaction? Like Pavel was mentioning this, that when she was a cisgender woman, and that's how some amount of sympathy was there to be with her. But for a trans woman would have been like a very different thing altogether. So I want to start with Ashwini. Like, what was your experience?
Okay, Barsha, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah. So when I intervened in most of the cases, it was my close friends, and most of them were friends from the community. So my intervention was received quite positively because in couple of cases, I voluntarily spoke to the survivor, and I extended whatever help that I could do, and they were happy with it. And in fact, survivors, friends of mine who were survivors, they shared a lot of details, and we tried to help them out. So that apart, the question that you kind of asked about the social biases that exist, I think we have to accept the fact that there are social biases. The most important thing is that we acknowledge that, and it is very strong when it comes to violence against women. The social identities like that of caste, class, within gender, particularly towards LGBTQ community, and all of these factors, it plays a dominant role. And also these social biases of caste, class, even a social background, or the geographical location that an individual hails from, all of that is perceived in a different way. If you look at a third party, how a judiciary is looking at you, or how a police would talk to you, or even a third person who has no clue of who the survivor is or who the abuser is, might have different perceptions. But if you see, I as a Dalit woman, I would like to share my own experience, in terms of, or even academically, or in terms of civil society groups, how they have tried to kind of explore the intersections that exist within gender. If you see, particularly, there's a recent report by one of the grassroots organizations called Swabhiman Society, which clearly has given that 80% of sexual violence against Dalit women is committed by dominant caste men. But at the same time, we also have to acknowledge the culture of impunity that exists when it comes to violence against marginalized women. And marginalized women, I'm speaking for all the LGBTQ community, Dalit, Adivasi, Muslim women, other backward caste women. So the impunity culture is much more, and the pattern of impunity, it varies from place to place. In a rural area, it can be through Kap Panchayat, where this report has very explicitly mentioned of about how the cases that they studied, of which 57% of cases were compromised, basically owing to community and the kind of social pressure that survivors and families of survivors face, because of which they got into, they were forced to, they were compelled to compromise. And at the same time, if you look at if one has to look at social biases, the classic example is that of Bhavri Devi's case, and the kind of prejudice, the way in which the entire case was handled. The judgment given by the court, where it acquitted all the accused, shows the strong prejudice towards caste, where the incident itself was denied, saying that the woman belongs to certain community and dominant men will not touch a woman who belongs to marginalized community. And therefore, I think we need to understand these social biases that exist, and we cannot, at the end of the day, marginalized women have to bear the brunt of their social identity. I think Pavel has very well explained about her own experience, particularly with that intervention that she had. So likewise, like that, if you see biases of caste, biases of class, and all these things, it adds up to particularly marginalized women. And unless and until there is this genuine intervention of acknowledging that yes, marginalized women face discrimination. It can be class, caste, gender, and it's much different in comparison to privileged communities. So that is something that I would like to highlight. And yeah, I would like to stop here.
Thank you, Ashwini. Thank you. Bringing this whole layering. It's not like a social identity is not like one identity. Like there is so many layers, and how that adds to any of the interaction, any of the social interactions what we face. I'll come to Bisma, and I would like to understand like. When if you have been subjected to any kind of violence in your life, how have you experienced bystander intervention?
Yes. So first of all, I want to say that in our society, there is this misconception that unless you get hit by somebody and you get a mark on your face, it's not violence. So first, we really need to understand that it's just one form of violence. There are different forms of violence, and discrimination is also violence. Verbal abuse, then there is mental abuse. So I want to share one of my experiences. So I was doing this internship in one of the institutions, and I have faced a lot of judgments. When I went there, first of all, I was given a Hindi book because they assumed that I belong to a certain community and I come from a certain area, so I might not be knowing English. So I was given a Hindi book over there. And then uh, there were many things which made it really difficult for me to work over there. I was ignored also. I was assumed that I am not as capable as other girls over there, and I was even told to change my dressing for a particular activity. I was told to, it would be better if I can take off my hijab. So that was the point where I tried to make them understand that, see, it's much more than that. It is a part of my identity and I do not want to take it off. But they did not understand it, and I had to, it became really difficult for me to work in that space, and I had to leave that internship in the end. And when I went to the co-interns who were also working there, I told them that, see, this happened with me, and they were like, you're just oversensitive, you're thinking too much. It's okay, it's not a big deal. So this is the kind of response I got. And when I went to like some of my friends, they told me that there were other Muslims girls also, they are not saying the same thing. Why are you saying that you face the particular thing? So on this, I want to say that Muslim women as a group, Muslim women, this is not a homogeneous group. There are differences, there are divisions, hierarchy, class, caste. There are many differences in that one group also. So we should not compare the experience of one Muslim woman from the experience of other Muslim women, because me as a hijab wearing Muslim woman comes from a ghetto, it makes me like triple marginalized. So it was really like, I was really hurt when I saw that people were taking it like comparing my experiences with other Muslim women. So I was really hurt because of that.
Thank you, Bisma, for sharing, because it's something we have been discussing yesterday also in our discussion, that how you have to subscribe to one kind of an identity in order to accept it by one kind of a group, and it's not possible. All of we have multiple identities, and how that's been perceived, and how basically that kind of translate to any kind of an action. um, I think Pavel in the previous the question only Z kind of mentioned in quite length. So I don't want to come back to the same with the same question, but I actually want to take this with the next question. What we also found, all of us, very interesting, that to understand this concept of space. We have been talking about space. We have been talking about violence and space, and how we experience violence in different space. And when we were actually thinking of this, going through a report, and also we were like formulating these questions, we realized that our idea of space also changes, perception of space also changes according to space. So it tends to, like, we tend to think domestic anything happening in a violence happening in domestic space is something private, where something happening in public place is it is um, like it's everybody's concern. At the same time, I don't want to name that application, but I do want to escalate this, that a lot of safety based applications are available these days, and which runs on people's perception. Basically, if you visit a place, you kind of put your numbering according to certain indicators, and we have seen, like, when you go through that, you do see that how people biases plays role. Because when I was just doing like a literally glance through, I saw that most of the Muslim areas, like, are considered in Delhi unsafe, where that's not been my experience. So I was like not able to match, like, okay, I don't think like I can roam around here, but why this person is thinking this is problematic. So, and it kind of triggered in my head that okay, how the perception plays role in order to even make a space safer or not safer. And when we were discussing, we actually wanted to actually come to Bisma and Pavel also, to talk about this whole ghettoization. I think I'll go to Pavel, because yesterday we were discussing this entire thing of like where, who stays where, why they stays, and how that's being perceived and connected with the whole safety concern.
Okay, about spaces. We have really nice, like panel Bisma, Ashwini, and Omkar to sort of throw light on it. What I'm going to speak ghettoization. I want to break some really interesting facts about the city that is Delhi, where we consider that, ghetto places like Sabdarjung or Munirka to be really unsafe. Like people have been talking, and I think particularly because this space is populated, is very multicultural. Like you cannot really say, like, I mean, Munirka or Sabdarjung Enclave, Humayunpur, these are all like Jat villages to begin with, but now it's a very multicultural space now. A lot of people lives there, and when I in my interaction with people from Delhi, a lot of people who calls Delhi home, people born and brought up in Delhi, they have this certain biases about how certain communities, like certain locality, when say talk about GK or certain communities are perceived as safe, whereas certain communities, like certain ghetto places like Munirka or Sabdarjung, as unsafe. But rather, in my experience, I have found, like, as Ashwini also sort of like, and Bisma also sort of like laid emphasis on the various kind of discrimination and violence that falls under gender-based violence, discrimination on the basis of your gender or your sex. These places, like, in my experience, like, I am an exotic other in Delhi. I am from Northeast, and also at the same time, I'm also a trans person. And I don't really feel safe in a lot of this like residential places, because I think there is where I face most of the othering. Like, for example, you go to a shop and you're trying to buy something, but the person just doesn't acknowledge your presence there, something like that. Or talk about people just ignoring you, like not recognizing your presence there, or people looking at you from a sour eye, or people treating you like you're invisible. I think a lot of this happens in a lot of these residential areas where high class family lives. Whereas in these ghetto places, I found these places to be a lot more safer for Northeastern women, to be precise. You will find women, Northeastern women, not just Northeastern women, but a lot of women walking around alone, coming back from office alone, like late in the night, and walking around in when I first came to Delhi, I also money was quite a concern, because Delhi is quite an expensive city, and then I, coming from Manipur, has to really think about my budget and stuff like that. So I didn't also want to be such a burden to my family. So I decided to pick places where accommodations were cheap. That's how I ended up living in these places. But eventually, I, not just being cheap, I just realized how safe these areas are in a lot of ways. yes, in terms of the kind of profile of people who lives there, in terms, like various people lives there from people, I don't know, like the kind of jobs, the kind of livelihood that people are living in these places do are menial jobs and stuff like that. And people look at the people from ghetto as living in needs and desperate needs, and because of their desperate needs, they're willing to do anything that they can to lend themselves a little more money or something like that. But I frankly hasn't really experienced all of that, and I feel like these are the biases in the mind of a certain class of people. But like if talk about Munirka, talk about um, Saldarsing Enclave, I've lived there for quite a long time, and now I live in Malvinagar. So I've seen like women come and go alone without any qualms of being even teased. It's not just a matter of somebody coming and like molesting you. Not even people, girls, not even concerned about being teased or being if teased. And this is in a Jat locality. And I think this sort of changed a lot of my perception on the Jat community. At the same time, the kind of social biases that I was introduced to when I first came to Delhi, because I came to Delhi as a student. So my introduction to the certain spaces in Delhi was, if I quote unquote, like, was through this intellectual academic feminist spaces, which is basically mostly inhabited by English speaking, upper class, middle class people. And that was, so as somebody who's just coming to Delhi, that was my first introduction to the landscape in Delhi, like what is safe and what is unsafe, what are the general norms, or what do people accept and not accept, were all through say at least middle class or like upper class intellectual group of people. And the kind of, I heard a lot about the regional biases within Delhi, like how certain areas in Delhi, like when I first said that I'm going to sort of move into Munirka or Subdarjung, a lot of people from a lot of people were like, oh, how are you sure, because those places are quite unsafe. But in my experience of living in Delhi, I found this place is more safer. Not just for my own self, but I've also seen, as I said, a lot of women, a lot of girls, a lot of Northeastern girls, like who are doing a lot of other, jobs in Delhi, like whether in call center, whether in wellness and spa center or anywhere, or as a makeup artist. A lot of them find such a lot of comfort and safety being in these places, not just from the perspective of women and safety, but also as the women of different ethnicity and coming and living in Delhi. So yeah, I think it's very interesting, sort of like break all these biases that is there as well. Yeah.
Thank you,
One
Pavel.
um,
Okay.
so one thing that I want to sort of add on uh, to the so there was this question about, you were asking about, like when when you are the subject of violence, and how do you tackle it. I want to throw one interesting point here. So here in Delhi, whenever I know I am vulnerable in a certain space, and when people started heckling me or when people started teasing me, I see a very interesting phenomena happening inside me as a queer feminist activist, as a social worker. All of us are trying to sort of like fight against the structures of power, like, and how structures of power because of class, caste, and particularly because through whatever it could be, that we are all trying to break the structure of powers that sort of like comes in. And what I find is that whenever, first and foremost thing, I have no expectations that anybody would intervene for me. That is one thing. So that isn't burden on myself. That at any time any violence happens to me, I have to be prepared. I go around with no expectations that in case I'm walking around with my friend, I know my friend will step in for me, but I have no expectations that any random stranger from the street will step in for me in Delhi. I have no expectations. So that's an added burden. Like every time I have to step out, I have to also prepare myself that, oh, anything might happen and I have to bear by myself. And when something like that happens, I had to, I see myself like falling back on my power and privilege. The fact that I'm an English speaking person, the fact that I can pretend to be an upper class or an upper caste person on the basis of the language that I speak. You know what I mean? Like trying to see, like, to if the person, it could be a man, it could be a woman who is sort of like picking on me for being gender non-conforming person, then my defense mechanism happens to be like looking at the structures of powers, because on the basis of being a cisgender, that person has taken a sense of power over me and trying to intimidate me. Then what are the other structures of power where I can go back and intimidate that person, just so that the situation will not escalate, you know? So if I find that the person is somebody who may not speak English or something, like I start speaking very fancy English, and like putting on accent if I can, just to intimidate that person by showing a certain sense of power in me which they don't have, which again, that will help in making sure that the situation doesn't escalate. But when I come back home, I also feel really guilty that I played on, again, another structure of power to get out of a certain intimidation. And the question is how, and then I keep thinking, how long will this continue? Will we ever get out of structures of powers and start looking at each other's and each,
Yeah.
or are we going to still keep on like playing cards, like like throwing out cards after cards after cards? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Pavel. I'll come to Omkar and want to understand what is your experience as a with a lot of homeless people doing work with them. Uh, do you think space plays an important role in it?
Yeah. So uh, before like I go on to that, I'll just add similar to what Pavel said. So I used to stay in slum before, and kind of areas were a little shady. But for me, it was my own space, my own community. So it was very safe. I never used to feel unsafe in that space. And recently, I shifted to a big apartment where I have 30, 35 buildings. Okay. So whenever I come back home in the night, I don't find those streets and roads very safe, because for me, there's this concept called eyes on streets. Okay. So in slums, there are always people looking out from the window. There are people who are sitting on streets. So it's always safe that way. Adding to this, I used to teach in a college where the exercise was about mapping. So I used to teach students on different mapping techniques. Okay, so they used to go to different parts of Bombay, urban outskirts of Bombay, where they used to go and do some on-site mapping. So once I had asked them to go to a slum where the similar exercise, similar term, similar project, where they have to go map slums, understand the streets, understand the culture and everything. So next day I got a call from a very senior professor for sending to a slum. So I said, I've never taken permission before this also, because they have been going to a lot of other places anyway. So why only for slums you thought that I should take your permission? So she said that girls went. Apparently called the principal saying that your one of the professor is sending all our children into the slum, which is safe. That was very kind of sad for me to realize, people say short slums that are not safe. And especially, no, none of the guys' parents called the principal, but all the girls' parents. So apparently, what I realized is, what people think is girls' slums are not safe for girls. So that incident was really sad, as I thought, I've been living in slums for so many years, and I actually think that the people who stays in slums are not that, bad. So that was my idea of a space, I would say, where I understand that space actually doesn't matter. You go to any rural, urban, or outskirts of any of the city. What matters is the people that you have around, and the kind of the faith that you have in peace. Yeah.
Thank you, Omkar. I think you brought like very interesting this whole angle of like distancing, I think Pavel and Ashwini and Bisma, all we actually coming back to this whole thing of like knowing your space, and if it's something unknown, how biases plays role, and how we kind of try to distance that entire, culturally distance the entire thing, that oh, these people are this, and you know, it's vis-a-vis how we understand. I have the same question for Ashwini. Ashwini, what do you have to say? What do you think about this whole space perception and how our biases plays role in that?
So with regards to space, yeah, I think all the speakers have covered most of it. But for me to give an opinion or perspective about space, we have to acknowledge that there's a strong stereotype that exists when it comes to space. Particularly, this stereotype also comes with the communities who live in that space. Often it is directed to areas or ghettos which are majorly occupied by people belonging to marginalized communities, be it Dalit, Adivasi, or Muslim communities. So there's this strong stereotype which also which brands spaces as something unsafe, or something which is not okay for women to be there. So that itself, it all comes from social identity. At the end of the day, we also have to see how urban areas or rural areas, or any areas for towns, are structured. Towns are structured on the basis of caste, on the basis of class. I mean, I'm from Bangalore, and one of the most considered to be the cosmopolitan city. There are areas which are named after castes. There are areas which are extremely posh, and you have all the facilities there, and relatively these spaces are considered to be safe because of the facilities there. Nearby police station, you have lights, you have everything there, and you can walk even at midnight. Nothing's going to happen. But while you look at couple of areas here in Bangalore, and which are majorly, as I told you, where marginalized communities live, and this is my experience. I take cab, and I have had conversations with the drivers who would just say, pass on comments when we pass through by a Muslim area, and they would say that how unsafe this area is. And then this has happened several times, where they live, it's unsafe. And also, when you see, particularly, I think I have to give this example of when Nirbhaya's case happened, how the class and the class background of the abusers were used, trying to say that anyone who belongs to that class are violent or are abusive. So these stereotypes are interconnected with caste, class, the communities that people belong to, and accordingly, the narrative of space is also constructed. I think that is something that we all should try to deconstruct, this narrative of stereotype and prejudice, and how we normalize this has had serious repercussion on communities. It's so difficult for someone to rent out a place in a better place where they want to live. So all of that has had serious repercussion on marginalized communities, and therefore I think it's high time that as civil society groups, as someone where we are trying to explore and deconstruct these notions, we have to see the multi layers that exist within this idea of space. And particularly, and now when we see how there is this rapid urbanization, we have a lot of thousands of people migrating from rural areas to urban areas. And then that itself, it changes the structure of the idea of space in cities, or in anywhere, any part of the country. So yeah.
Thank you, Ashwini. Actually, while listening to you, I was just thinking that, how this is not limited to just the space and that bystander action, that how it has repercussion in the justice system. Like if we consider the case of Bhavri Devi, there is like a act is in place, sexual harassment at workplace, but she's yet to receive the justice. So it's not just limited to the space and that act of event, but how it impacts the larger justice system and the consequence. I'll come to Bisma, and I'll request her to share what's been her experience.
Okay, so all the panelists, they explained about ghettoization really well. I just want to say that ghettoization is not a new thing. It has been happening with Jews and blacks, and it is a social process where members of a particular community are they are confined, restricted to certain space, alienated. And when they are alienated, people do not want to enter these areas, and people will not enter these areas. They will not know that if these areas are really safe or not. So people will have this stereotypes that these people are dangerous, these areas are not safe for women. So today, if you live in a ghetto, no, you have to move 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers out of the area to even get a cab. So that is the situation here. And that's how, if you'll not, as I mentioned, if you'll not enter these areas, you will not know if these are really safe or not. So that's how stereotypes works. People starts, building up these stereotypes that you need to stay away from these people, need to stay away from these areas. So that's what is happening.
Bisma, I also want to ask you about certain issues you were bringing up yesterday about your identity and this. You spoke about your identity, but as a bystander who's actively working on bystander, also like giving trainings, how do you think that this whole multiple identity what you're carrying as a Muslim, hijabi, woman, feminist, how are you perceived as a bystander?
Okay, so there is a dilemma attached with my identity, because I feel that somewhere I am, in many spaces I'm not accepted by both the groups. Like there are people, both the groups. If we talk about the Muslim community and if we talk about the feminists, they both have some judgments about me because I have really mixed personality. So sometimes it becomes really difficult for me to get accepted by both the groups, because for some people I'm too too oppressed. Some people often say that I have internalized it, I have to wear hijab, this is also a sign of patriarchy. But at the same time, I want to assert my identity. I want to wear it for me, for myself, and I don't want to sexualize my body, because the meaning of freedom is different for everybody. For someone, nudity is empowering, and for other people it's the opposite. So we really need to understand that. Also, people need to be more accepting regarding this. I would just say that.
And as all of you are saying that how that kind of strengthens the stereotypes. Like every moment we think that we are out of stereotype or we are thinking in a certain way, so we are not stereotyping somebody. But I think all of us, we are actually trying to come back to this same point that how all of it's violence against women. And when I'm talking about women, I'm talking about like the entire larger gambit of like cisgender and transgender women. um, how it is anybody who identifies as women and how it kind of impacts. um,
I would just
I
add one more
I
thing.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
So
Yeah.
a lot of times I am also appreciated by the Muslim community because they believe that I have a voice, I am representing. So that is also the case. People want like the community to study, to become the voice, right? To talk about it, to have the identity also, and as well as to talk, to have a voice. So that is also the case.
Bisma?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Hey, Omkar, you want to come in here? Omkar, can you hear? Mm, I'm not sure whether Omkar is able to hear me. Uh, okay. So Omkar, when you join back, I think we'll actually take his point. So actually, I have a question, and that kind of leading towards like the last question we have is similar question. It's from Rukmini Banerjee, and she's asking in terms of familial bystanders. A lot of it is because of gender roles. That women are supposed to face some violence at the hands of husband or in-laws. How do we tackle this feeling of bystander apathy? I think it's a very, very valid question, because a lot of time it becomes easier for us to stand up for somebody we don't know, but it becomes more difficult when we need to stand up somebody of our own. So who wants to answer? Like, anybody want to answer, or like?
Yeah, I mean, briefly, I can answer this. I mean, it's a pertinent question. Also, it important aspects like that of conditioning. There's something called in academia which we say false consciousness, and false consciousness is more to do with how an oppressed community or an oppressed individual tries to kind of agree to what is happening to him or her or they. Like, it's okay normalizing that because we belong to certain caste, certain gender, and it is normal for us that we are subjected to this kind of discrimination. So I think at the end of the day, the agency of any individual who's subjected to oppression. Yeah, I'm not confining it to Dalit or Adivasi or known, because there are different communities who face similar discrimination. So at the end of the day, I think for marginalized communities, including women, it's about education, it's about having that self confidence. And somewhere down the line, these are institutions which have been there for institutionalized, these practices are institutionalized for centuries together, and for us to dismantle it, it'll take couple of centuries. So that is one of the reasons that irrespective of however educated we are, progressive we are, at some point of time we try to back off and try to compromise certain things. And I think at the end of the day, it is that individual perspective, individual stance that one can take and confront what they're facing.
Thank you, Ashwini. Yesterday only, I was reading this very interesting tweet where somebody tweeted that if your friend, is coming to you and saying that has been sexually harassed by another friend of yours, don't question that person. Like, listen to the person, be with that person, and if you have a confusion, if you can't stand with the person, be silent. And that in a way a lot of time helps, other than, because we tend to that how we kind of try to defend our people, or try to like dismiss that, oh, this has not been my experience, so maybe you're just lying. So I think I'll come to Pavel, because Z was actually giving like very interesting ideas that how do we intervene, because it's not always very easy to intervene even if you want to intervene. And a lot of time in our research also, we have seen that intervention is also perceived something very brave and courageous, and you have to do something in order to like stop it. But the intervention which worked were extremely smart, and it can be anything. I actually want to give this example what I have faced in my life. I was in some other country, and I was uh, eating in a food court, and there were these two men came, and they started asking me a lot of questions and wants to know that which hotel I'm staying in and want to go with me, and things. And I was just like trying to avoid them. So the lady who was serving us food, and we were actually, me and those two guys, all of us were waiting for the bill to come. And that lady kind of noticed that I was not feeling comfortable, that these two men are coming and just trying to strike conversation. And she came, she handed me the bill, and did not hand it over the bill to those men. So I immediately paid and then left. So I think she understood that I was not very comfortable, and she wanted to release me so that I can leave and hold those two men, and did not give their bill till I left. And that was something a very interesting, very non-confrontational, very smart gesture, but that kind of diffused the situation and helped me to move from that place. So we have been actually hearing a lot of interventions, the stories of how people intervene, and we have seen that how very smartly people are trying to take the cue. But is it that simple? Because in this case, again, like I'm a cisgender woman, and this whole biases are less. So I want to understand, like, Pavel, you were saying like you use accents and stuff to intimidate people, so that and all of us, we try to take those kind of mechanisms. So what do you think, like, what are the measures people can take, and especially if you're not from a very normative kind of an identity which people are used to it?
Hmm. Um, I think confidence is very important. One thing we have to carefully observe is the fact that just as how being a victim of sexual assault is also a stigma, being an assaulter is also a stigma. And not just necessarily with regard to sexual assault, but in any case. We talk about how victimization, being a victim, there's a stigma attached to it. There's a lot of empathy and there's a lot of pity that comes, which also can trigger, which can, it's, instead of uplifting you, can also really like pull you down that trauma and get you trapped in that trauma. But at the same time, I think there is like what we are talking about, how the abusers are abusing because of certain privilege and power sanctioned to them by, it could be cultural, it could be social, it could be political, it could be economical reasons, certain power that they feel, and hence they feel like they can intimidate you. You know how we talk about how this assault and assaulter and assaulted relationship works in a very in a power dynamics. So but one thing that we can always remember is that being an assaulter is also not really a pleasant image in the society. So I think instead of being intimidated to fight back, sometimes, I mean, again, this is a very tricky thing to say, when do you fight back. Talk about an instance when I was caught by somebody late in the night, and this person was trying to push me and force me into his car, and there were people around, but those people who were around were daily wage workers, so one can totally talk, they are from they're not, and this guy has a car, so it's in the city. So though when those people looked around at me when I was asking for help, he intimidated them, based on his caste and his class privileges, so they couldn't intervene. At that time, fighting was really not my option. So what I'm trying to say is there are certain times when fighting for it can really put you on a major, more graver assaulted position. But if there are people around, then just stepping up and be confident about it and just raising a voice makes a lot of difference, which is what I've seen many times when I'm, and particularly talking about marginalized women and talking about transgender women, what all of us are very afraid to really put an alarm about our own safety and vulnerability, because we feel like a lot of people already hate us, and doing that, even then we do that also, we were not going to get any sympathy or empathy from anybody else, and it will just add on to making a joke about ourselves, how society look at us as a joke, and whatever we do, whether in celebrations of ourselves or whether as a victim, everybody just look at us as a spectacle, so they feel like it. But then I feel like just stepping out of that like space and just saying I deserve to be, like I deserve this, what can I say, I deserve to be I deserve the help of others. I think that's very important. On other cases, when I have seen certain things happen, again, as because of my gender identity and because of my rational, I mean, in Manipur, I find it very powerful. Like I see something like that happening, I can intervene just like that. But in Delhi, when I find it happening, because we do come across a lot of instances whereby we see a man and a woman in a quarrel or in a fight. All of us have come across this. So here I get a little intimidated to really directly intervene because I'm also concerned about, but what I do is that I don't just walk away. I make sure that I'm there. As what Omkar was also pointing out, when there are other people around, violence do not escalate. So just being around, help. Um, and just asking what's happening. Just a very simple act is just, kya ho raha hai? It helps escalate. And and also I guess among the bystander, everybody is not stepping because nobody is again finding the courage to intervene. And when they see one person stop by and ask what's happening, the rest of the other people who were also a little disturbed by what they, maybe they were ignoring so far, they will also feel like, they will keep them in encouragement to also step in. So far, they have not been able to step in because of the social biases. They're not able to, or certain other biases and certain questioning. They're not able to really step out of and intervene. But when you see someone else do it, you will also see that other people will instantly, like start getting attention. Yeah, that's one thing that I would say. And when it comes to the family wala thingy, I think it's a very question. I feel like this is a very pertinent question, not just for anybody, but particularly for us feminists, because all of us are working in such, Barsha, like we are, when something come out in the news, all of us are like gung-ho about it, like dropping bombs here and there and every places where we can. And when something like this happen in our family, we always find ourselves in a very, very, I mean, I went home to Manipur for 1 year. This was after being out of home and practicing and being working as a activist against violence against women and gender-based violence in general for a long time. And I was back at home and I realized that I have been fighting all this battle elsewhere, and in my home there's a lot of battles to fight. But it was also quite as much as people were recognizing me for the voices I was raising against violence against women, I realized how much difficult was it for me to raise my voice in my family. And particularly because I know that being the youngest person in the family and also being a gender non-conforming person in the family, I've seen it from my childhood that my family never really like takes me into account. And I knew that even if I raised, this was in the case when my sister had a break with her husband, and the question was about whether she should go back to her husband or not. And you know how it is. Everybody was like, well, this is not before they were married. This is after they are married. So the best is for her to go back and try and since we have not had any, like, it was not like she had been facing a lot of violence and abuse from her husband. It was just like, it just happened one time. So everybody was like, it just happened one time. So they should sort of, and I remember, as you said, I talked to my sister just to see what she was coming from, because I think agency is very important of what she wants to do and what she doesn't want to do. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the solution. It's about how, after the incidents that sort of shook her trust on some of the most trusted people in her life, her husband, and now her family, because her family is about to make a decision for her and she would want us to make a decision on her side. So it was more about her reinforcing that sense of trust and faith in the fact that she should be able to take her own agency and not really fall back on like traditional criticisms about what's happening. And so I wanted to hear her out, and it was particularly because I wanted to see where she stood. And the moment I could feel a lot of rage that she had, like at that time, against my family and against my brother-in-law, because she felt like they let her down. The first thing that I decided to do was, like, I realized that I also need to also like step it up, and I can't, I knew that I wouldn't be hurt, but the point is to still make a point, because without it, the tradition will go on. Nobody would have intervened.
Yeah.
This is not just in her life, in the Sagolsem's family and relatives and all happen. But such kind of intervention coming in from somebody as young as another thing is somebody who is among the youngest people in the relation. All of that.
Yes.
I felt like this has to happen, and I had to do it. Of course, it was not taken that much into account, but I felt like making that
It's important to break the chain. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So so my point. So I think it's along we keep on talking to the victims about how they need to step up, and they need to step up, and they need to step up. We have to also start thinking. We have to also look at the fact that the sense of empowerment and sense of power and sense of entitlement, and like the fight, the passion for fight and all, in the survivor is also not isolated. It's when they would see a culture or people supporting her or him or they or them or anybody that person is, the person will be able to step up. So it's not just a matter of the survivor stepping up, it's also a matter of us, like questioning our own, like inhibitions, and why don't we not intervene. So that makes a difference. And family is the space where I feel like as a feminist, it has to be our first and foremost thing. We learned about feminism from family, our mother, the experiences of our mother, the kind of culture of violence that our brother and our fathers are trapped into. All of this were all the foundations. So I feel like it's very important to to make that stand when it comes to our family. Yeah.
Thank you, Pavel. That was really insightful. Like, I'll quickly come back to. I think Omkar is back. He has joined. So, uh, Omkar, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah, Omkar. So, actually, we were discussing. I think you got the question, and it's basically how do we collectively, I mean, how do we intervene? Like a lot of time, it's kind of a collective action, or a lot of times, it's easier to intervene when you're outside, but it's easier to intervene. It's not so easy to intervene when it's somebody of your own. So, what do you think? What kind of strategies works? So we'll quickly listen to you, and then we'll go to Bisma. Yeah.
Correct. So, to the extent that if it's my own city, if it's my own community, it's easy for me because to take a action, because I know that I am in a kind of a safe environment. Even if I take some action against the someone, I'm still in a safe environment. So I would the things that comes into my mind when such incidents I see, or if I have to suggest someone how to overcome these thoughts, it's basically we are in a that in a safe bubble, or we are kind of selfish, where we think, is it really safe for me? मैं क्यों करूं, मुझे नहीं फर्क पड़ता, those kinds of attitude. So I think the first and very important thing is we should broaden our thinking, and we should come out of that selfishness. If we don't try to come out of that thought where it can be risky, or it's not safe for me, I really don't care about it, I'm getting late for work, why do I to invest some time? So that thing of selfishness should be the thing where we as a person should work. And I think the moment we stop thinking about that selfishness, I think most of us can come forward and take action, or can have a solution for this.
Thank you, Omkar. Bisma?
Yes. Yes, as Pavel already mentioned, that it takes a lot of courage to intervene. So first, I believe that in order to intervene, we first need to know that what are the impacts it is having on the person who is getting harassed, right? So first, we really need to understand, okay, what are the impacts they are having. And also, if we talk about intervening, so I would say that if we don't have the courage to intervene directly, we can always use any other indirect way to intervene, right? If we are not able to go and say, stop, you're doing wrong, we have like other ways, less direct way to intervene, but we should not just ignore violence, I would say that.
Thank you, Bisma. I'll just, we have received a lot of questions, very interesting questions. So I'll just start, and feel comfortable, whoever wants to answer. So the first question is from somebody, FA. As women from marginalized communities, we are expected to be sacrificial lambs at the altar of the higher cause when perpetrators are from our own community. What are the panelists' thought? I'll come to Ashwini for this question. Ashwini, if you like to answer to this.
Okay, so this is something that has bothered me a lot, this thing of larger cause. I would like to share my own experience. I'm sorry to trigger warning because I'm a survivor and I have faced sexual harassment in one of the prominent human rights organization which was based previously here in Bangalore. So the abuser in my case happened to be from my community. I'm a Dalit and he happened to be from my community, and I'm very cautious of how there is this prejudice towards men from marginalized community. I'm very cautious of that. And initially, there were a lot of my friends within the organization and outside as well, few of them who were extremely supportive. And I was a little hesitant to file a case because I know that it's a chance that I'm giving to a dominant Savarna organization who have their own biases of caste and class will very easily fire this man. And when I confronted this man, he was unapologetic. And before even I could go file a complaint, he raised a complaint against me that I'm being rude to him. And also he confessed to the organization. I'm also trying to highlight the aspect of impunity or negligence that comes from certain dominant communities, especially in the most progressive space. And despite knowing the fact that the programs director, whoever the people who were in position of power, knowing that I've been subjected to this kind of treatment, they let me report to this man for about 2 weeks until I filed a case. And I had to file a case. I had no other option. And this man was after me for life. Like, he tried to harass me. He has filed defamation case against my friends who are my witnesses, my father, my in-laws, my partner, every possible thing. And here, and the most important thing is I had friends, couple of people particularly from within progressive circles, feminist groups, who suggested me not to take it up legally. And I was told, at the end of the day, we have to see the larger cause. Who are our real enemies? At the end of the day, it is the dominant community or the right wing. This narrative was given before me. And in fact, one of the very prominent lawyers in Hyderabad suggested few that, why can't she compromise? Why is she dragging it? He's the same person who is on panels speaking about various issues of caste, class, and everything. And not only that, there were feminists who are very, very vocal, who are, who speak about various issues, have time and again, tried to sympathize with the abuser. And try to bring in that narrative of how they indulge in assassinating character of the survivor. And I was labeled as someone who is elite. The abuser even ended up saying that she's English speaking Dalit whose father is so and so, and therefore she has no understanding of discrimination. This is what was told. And this thing of when you assert from, especially when you're from a marginalized community, and I accept that I have relatively certain privilege compared to many other women within my own community. My education, social background, there is some level of social capital that I have. But however, at the end of the day, I cannot detach myself from my social identity of me being a Dalit and a woman. And this thing of larger cause, I think whenever someone brings about this idea of larger cause, at the end of the day, it is the marginalized women who are at risk. We are the ones who are put at risk, all in the name of a larger cause. And I would like to honestly say that I refuse to be a victim of larger cause, because we try to negotiate, we try to understand. Not that Dalit women don't understand things. Marginalized women very well understand things, considering the kind of discrimination they face since birth. So when we try to negotiate and we don't get this support, and we are compelled to take up serious action, and for me, it's just not one case. And the kind of intimidation I've faced by the abuser, I have filed another case against the abuser, and I've been told by various circles, including journalists, prominent journalists, who questioned me that there was no need for you to take up a legal case. It could have been sorted out. where the irrespective of how strong my case is, where the abuser himself has confessed and this substantial evidence. So I think this concept of larger cause has to be just sidelined, and it just can't be at the cost of marginalized women's agency and their very existence. I think this is something that every time we speak about violence and this deconstructing the discourse of violence, I think one should actually address this in a very serious manner. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashwini, and thank you for trusting this platform to share this your own experience. And it's not something very easy to share, especially when you're fighting this battle for a while. I'll come to the next question, which is one of the bystander perspectives that requires discussion is the issue of reintegration of survivors of trafficking. Having worked in this domain, I have seen that both familial rejection and social distancing and indifference makes it is impossible sometimes to get back to life again. Any thought on that? Anybody wants to? This question is something very specifically in terms of trafficking, and it's a.
Yeah, Barsha. Hello.
Yeah,
Can you
Pavel.
hear?
Yeah.
So I don't have much to say, but I think there's one thing that I really wanted to bring out. I think there's also another question on Q&A about COVID-19, something related to COVID-19 as well. So,
Pavel, if we can take this question, if anybody wants to answer, then I was coming to that next.
So one thing is like regarding both the question, I just wanted to point out something that really came out. I mean, firstly, picking in from the trans women and the lived realities of trans person and the bill that has come up and the kind of what we've been fighting in the reformation with the trans bill as well was also something very related to the reintegration. So while I was working in Nazaria for lesbian, bisexual, and queer person, at the same time when I was working in Breakthrough, despite, I mean, not when I was working in CHSA, because then I was working with men, but when I was working with women and when I was working with lesbian, bisexual, and queer women issue, one thing that constantly came up is the infrastructure in terms of like shelter homes, in terms of so we see a lot of advocacy, we see a lot of awareness and programs on understanding, like unboxing and looking at redressal mechanisms for it and laws and a lot of it. I think there is a lot of resources being put in that, and which is being done for the right reason, but at the same time something that that as talking from the perspective of organizations and activists who are working on violence against women, is this thing about the we've been talking about how family is essentially a site of violence, and we have like laws like like protect like which grants protection from the family. You can but the point is, but at the same, but we have all these laws which talk about what are the offenses and what are not the offenses. We don't have the infrastructures for where these people can go to. Like we don't have enough shelter homes, and the condition of shelter homes are really, really bad. So if and this resorting back to like I don't know, like this is a very critical issue, integration, and generally comes up with essentially with the impunity of family, how family as an institution is never questioned, and how our idea of family is still very essentially heteronormative, at the same time also very biological, in the sense we queer people have been talking about it for a long time, this idea of alternative families, it has really worked for us. as in when a queer person is running away from home, there is a lot of instances like this. It's, I mean, queer people, trans people running away from home is just every day we face it every day. As a trans activist, as queer activists, are something you come across every day, and so most of the time this reintegration with the family is really not the solution. And then the next thing is, then where can we give them accommodation? Most of the time, our like, for people, a lot of the survivors are also people from people whose financial needs and all are very, they're also very dependent on their family also. So it can't just be shelter as well. There has to be, it can't be really called rehabilitation, but there has to be like certain infrastructures, a certain funding that is to be developed, shelter homes, skill-based centers and stuff like that. Very important to look into it. Yeah. That's what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Pavel. I'll just go through the question again, and I want to take like answers from like rest of you. What do you think about it? Is heart heart no heat Torellen or something, the name, I'm not able to pronounce it properly. I would be interested to know if the panel thinks that the impact of COVID and the increase of caring roles for women might lead to a re-traditionalize the power structure that support the normalization of violence against women in public and private spaces, uh, and thus revert the tentative progress in the SDG in equality and empowerment. I have been looking at the role of access to transport in urban areas as an enabler of social change, while recognizing that this is a zone where high level harassment and violence. Okay, so there are basically three questions. One is, do you see that this impact of COVID is going to again re-traditionalize the power structure, and how it has impacted women? Are we going back to the same space of normalization violence? That's the first question. And the question with how this whole SDGs, a sustainable development goal, there are different indicators, country-wise indicators, which maps the empowerment under goal number 5, equity and empowerment, whether that's going to be impacted. And I mean, it's talking about like his own experience working in transport and public space and transport, as it's one of the space where we do see like high level of harassment and violence. So, Omkar, do you want to go and share your thoughts about it? That how do you think that it's going to the COVID and vis-a-vis this entire violence against women and its impact on women? Omkar, are you there?
Hello. Yes.
Yeah, Omkar. Yeah, we can.
So I would like to answer the first question about the impact of COVID. Honestly, I doubt, that the impact of COVID can change anything about this issue, because there are certain such kind of big events have happened earlier, where we were hoping that this issue can be issue, but I can have some kind of solution, or maybe the rate of such kind of a violence will decrease. Yeah.
Thank you. Bisma, what do you think about it? What is your take? Do you think, hello, Omkar? Okay. Bisma? Bisma, can you hear us? Okay. Uh, I'm not sure. There's something. This network glitch is like the biggest problem conducting this kind of a panel, because keep on asking, getting back to the people whether they're connected or not. Ashwini, do you want to take up this question? What do you think about like this thing? Because we have one thing I want to mention, like in breakthrough during the whole lockdown, there's something we worked like totally too much. All our energy was domestic violence, and we saw that how domestic violence spiked during that time. And that point of time also, we were talking about how bystander intervention can work, how you can basically check on your friends have been subjected to violence. But I'd like to hear from Ashwini. What do you think about this whole redirectionalization and normalization of our structure? Do you think we are going back post COVID?
I think pandemic has had a lot of impact, repercussion, particularly on women, and the impact has been quite severe for marginalized women. I know Breakthrough has worked on a couple of issues related to this particular topic, and at the same time, if we see even international organizations like that of UN, there have been UN rapporteurs who have responded particularly with regards to India, where women from marginalized communities, and here I would specifically would like to mention about minority community women, like that of Muslim community women, who have been subjected to a lot of discrimination, particularly during pandemic. And then it's also about the kind of hate that was created during the COVID situation in 2020. We all have seen, particularly on social media platforms, how these hate hashtags were circulated, economic boycott of a Muslim community, or you see the Corona jihad, that narrative that was constructed, which also led to inaccessibility of basic facilities for women from Muslim community, particularly when it came to health facility. There were several cases across India where women from Muslim community were denied access to health facilities, denied access to even basic public distribution food, which was distributed by the government agencies. And apart from that, if you also look at in terms of re-traditionalizing the power structure, I think at the end of the day, the traditional roles are so confined to women, and irrespective of who the women is, particularly when this thing of work from home came in, I had to hear a lot of people, particularly my colleagues and various other people who had families, children, where they were stuck up with all the household work at the same time. They had to work, they had to teach lot other things, and at some point of time, it in a way has kind of impacted the lives of women, particularly both physically, and it has been physically draining, mentally draining. And we have seen a number of articles written by women across communities, across different geographical locations. So that's one. And there has been interventions, as I told you, by various civil society groups, intergovernmental organization. And I think, I don't know about, if I have to mention of SDG, if we also look at how intergovernmental organizations have been setting these goals, be it the millennial development goals or sustainable development goals, we also have to understand that intergovernmental organizations have their own limitations. At the end of the day, it is the particular country policies, domestic policies, that will lead to a lot of positive impact. So we cannot expect UN to bring in a policy here in India. So I feel SDGs, at the end of the day, MDG, we all know the time period for MDG was 2016. For SDG, it is 2030. But if we look at the limitations of MDG itself, to how far have we been successful in reaching out those goals? So at the end of the day, we all know the limitations that exist in intergovernmental organizations, and it has to be a genuine effort by the state, by the government, by the respective governments of different states, to bring in proactive policies which will reflect the welfare ideas, the ideas like that of socialism, the ideas like that of liberalism. And that's how we can bring in progressive policies, and it will have a positive impact.
Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you very much. And absolutely, like, what are the indicators and who is deciding what indicators of development, and what is empowerment? It's like we need another discussion altogether to discuss that. There's another question from Team Kelaza. So the question is, the pandemic has also seen teachers as bystanders to domestic violence meted out to children, in the form of both verbal abuse and assault. Teachers have been shared with us the trauma they feel and express their sense of helplessness at not being able to do anything. Do we have any set of guidelines, advisories on the role of teachers under these circumstances, particularly because it looks like online schooling is not going to go away any soon? Actually, for this, I'm going to request Manjusha. Manjusha, if you can take this question, because you are integral, like one of the main part of this research. You have spoken to all the people, and you have actually this in the research, in the report also, we talk about like what are the key actions or behavioral actions one can take. So I'll request Manjusha if you can answer this question.
Hi, Varsha. Sure. Unfortunately, there was a network issue, so I missed the first half of your question. What do you want to understand? How interventions were modulated?
Yeah, so basically, this person wants to know that as this online schooling is going on, right? So a lot of teachers were experiencing or they were witnessed domestic violence, what their students are facing, and a lot of teachers shared that how they felt helpless because they could not do anything about it. They were not able to do anything. So any set of guidelines or any set of advisory for the teachers, if they're witnessing some kind of a thing during online classes, if the verbal or like a physical assault, what will be from your findings, what you have seen, like any advisory if you can suggest?
Okay, sure. Thanks, Varsha. So the thing, of course, is we all know how complicated. One of the things that we've sort of repeatedly highlighted through our report and the discussion in our first half was to look at intervention in a lot more complicated fashion. And we also understand how complex it is, because we're looking at, particularly with domestic violence, now the intervention, the site is essentially the family. And because of the complex nature of that space, intervention of any kind of is very difficult. So even when we spoke to participants of ours who experienced domestic violence themselves or grew up in homes which witnessed domestic violence on a very regular basis, all of them repeatedly told us about how intervention. So sometimes, some of these very simple things is, of course, just speaking up. Even if it's not a direct confrontation, is actually standing by the survivor and saying that I'm here, and in whatever capacity and whatever fashion you might need support, we are here to give that to you. And something as simple as perhaps like ringing the bell, and this is something like which Breakthrough had also introduced, which is the Bell Bajao campaign, which is essentially to let the person, both the survivor and the perpetrator, know that there are people watching. And this is something that the power of bearing witness was something that we encountered through these narratives in our participant interviews, where for example, this very interesting anecdote that was shared with us from our Bombay participant who told us, who witnessed a domestic violence sort of case on the Bombay local trade platform. And she said that, because they were young and they were worried and they weren't sure how to intervene, what they did is, both of them young girls, they went and stood very close to the couple and made sure to make the perpetrator uncomfortable. So that was one strategy that they used. So with regard to teachers, and this is something, again, I go back to the report, where we repeatedly said that family is a major site of violence. So whenever we think of violence, we think about violence, and whenever narratives of the state, particularly the official narratives of safety around women, protecting women, it's almost always where the narrative and the discourses always projects as if there's this lurking stranger somewhere on the street But what we've realized is that more than the lurking stranger, it's actually people very intimately connected to women who are the greatest perpetrators, right? So for teachers, I'm assuming, and I understand that this is an extremely complicated problem. So one suggestion, of course, would be to quietly, and we also understand that even women and people, while they are going through these extremely violent, cyclic, and we also got domestic violence. One of the important things is the cyclic nature of it. It's a vicious circle. It goes on, and women find it very difficult to extract themselves from that sort of a situation. And one of the important reasons, it goes back to something that Pavel mentioned, is that we do not have rehabilitation measures. So when we look at systemic interventions, we do not, again, like Pavel mentioned, shelter homes are terrible. Like if you speak to people, if you look at survivors, where do these women go? Their resources, their economic and their social, if they walk out of their marriage, they risk stigma. If they walk out of their marriage, they risk economic poverty. So, walking out, they risk losing connections with their family, kin, children particularly. How can they walk away? So where can they go to? Particularly if you're looking at, and this goes back to what our panelists have all our panelists have so fantastically laid out for us, that this homogenization of this category of woman, right? So we've unpacked it. We've countered biological determinism. We're saying we're not just sex, and there are the families and kinship relationships lie at the confluence of this, of different communities, of kinship relations, of class, caste, and community networks, and the woman's body. Right, and that's where and her body is the site, and her so honor, community honor, family honor, everything is on her body. So intervening is of course complex, particularly in the family space, but they are some of the very interesting subtle ways, because we have also realized that women, sometimes a lot of the survivors do not want too much attention directed towards themselves. They would like to keep the mode of intervention as low key as possible, because they don't want to generate too much attention. So in that way, maybe is just standing, listening to the person. Sometimes just something as simple as listening, standing up, and just being there can help. Just talking to the perpetrator, talking to family members and teachers. Also, there's interesting about India is that of course teachers still carry some social currency, in the sense they have a standing in society. So the way we've thought to think of teachers as people. So one can hope that perhaps even other family members perhaps might listen to these teachers. So that's one possible way of intervening and speaking up against situations of violence.
Yeah,
thank you.
Barsha,
We are almost, we have
just
only
wanted
like
to,
3-4 minutes. Yeah.
just wanted to
Can
add
we,
one thing.
okay. You have like
Teacher,
10.
if you, as a teacher, yeah, I just only 1 minute. As a teacher, what you have this a lot of time to introduce a lot of things to the students. Something very basic that you can introduce is that when you feel unsafe, get away from that place, and also try to find a safe place to go to. These are very simple things that can be told to students. Very simple thing. And this I got this idea because when COVID-19 happened, I remember I was working in Nazaria, and we were working on a draft of, because all of us are all bound by the lockdown, so we couldn't really go out and reach out to the people who are facing the violence. So particularly to a space like lockdown where people can't really reach out to that person, what are the guidelines that we can develop for them? So one particular guideline, one thing that we started off with: if you're feeling unsafe, get away from that place and go to some place safe. So these are ideas that we can plant in the student's mind if you see this happening. Of course, like intervention through Zoom calls, online classes, to call it out and sting could be really traumatic for that young person. Breaking the bubble is really not the way to go forward. There are lots of, then you can get in touch with a lot of, if in case this violence is grave, then one can get in touch with organizations trying to see intervention is important. But certain things, simple things that can be given to children is, if you feel unsafe, get away from that place and go to some place safe. So these are very simple ideas that can be given to students. Yeah.
Thank you. We have like really 2-3 minutes left, so we very clearly will take like one round of like a final 10 seconds. from all of our panelists. Bisma, I want to start with you. Um, so we have been discussing today essentially like that whole bystander intervention, and it's a simple yet a very complex idea. So we all collectively are responsible for our well-being. We all collectively we need to create the safe space where people feel comfortable to intervene. At the same time, people also come forward to intervene. Um, so, taking from our conversation today, the entire conversation, what is that one starting point for you? So, I'll start with Bisma, then I'll go to Omkar, Ashwini, and Pavel.
Okay. First of all, I want to say that I'm not able to open my video. Can you help me with that?
Yes, give me just a second. Now, can you?
Just a second. Yes. Okay. So I want to say that, as I mentioned earlier, we all have a certain identity, and people have stereotypes against us because of our identities. So, because of that, we might sometimes feel that, okay, I should not intervene, maybe because ऐसा ना हो कि मेरे ही ऊपर आ जाए, या maybe I will face this violence if I'm intervening. But I would just say that what I said earlier, we can always use a less direct way, an indirect way to intervene, but we should never ignore violence because of our identity. I would say that.
Omkar?
Hello. Yeah. So, uh, what I think is, I personally believe that everyone is good. Okay, we should have that faith, and uh, there are a lot of seminars, workshops. People are aware about this too. They are about it. So I think it has been very easy, at least for me. It has been very easy to interview because I know people will forward. People have understood the gravity of the problem. It's just that it take a very little step, and I'm very sure because we have that faith that people are good, and they know about this issue, they'll come forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Ashwini?
Um, yeah. So for me, Barsha, I think my experience, my social identity itself is a starting point for me to intervene somewhere. My social identity and a lot of conversations that I've had with friends, family, all of that has created a kind of perspective in me. I mean, I adhere to a kind of ideology, and I think at the end of the day, initiatives like this, and also there's no dearth of material or anything. I mean, because we live in a technologically advanced space, so we have access to a lot of things. We read a lot of testimonies, a lot of experiences. I think at the end of the day, it is that individual urge to support a survivor, and for me it is like, if not support, at least don't harm the survivor. So that is something that each one of us should keep in mind, because at times maybe survivors also might go silent, and I think we have no right to question as to why they went silent. So if not support, at least we should not hamper their very existence, or if they're trying to take up their case or report their case. So I think it's all about bringing that awareness, building that sisterhood, that fraternity within the space that will create a lot of safe space for survivors, or in general for everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. Pavel?
Yeah. So, that particular line that that a lot of people keep falling to about how आपकी माँ नहीं है, आपकी बहन नहीं है, वगैरह करके. I think it's also the same, like when you intervene, when make the space safe for someone, you're making it safe for everyone. And not just particularly saying that you're making it safe for women, you're making it safe for men as well, you're making it safe for everyone, including yourself. So it's not just a matter of helping one person, it's about the culture of creating public places or any places where there is any human available, a safe space for another human. So yes, so I mean, let's work with that. I mean, following in the logic that when you just intervene and make it safe for one person. You're making it safe for yourself. You're making it safe for people that you love. You're making it safe for everybody else. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all our panelists. I mean, it was very, very interesting to actually listen to all of you and listening to your experience and think about our own biases, checking on our own biases, that how every moment through pop culture, through the information we have, through the traditional knowledge system we have, our families, our friends, the social ecosystem we work in, how every moment they propagate biases, and how it is important for us to be very, very aware about our biases and hence working on it to come out of it. Thank you everybody for joining this discussion. Thank you so much. You can, visit our website for the reports. You can download the summary and the full report from there. And also I want to mention that we are running a petition to Delhi government. It's available on change.org. It's basically to include bystander intervention in terms of violence against women, for violence against women to be part of their Delhi Ke Farishte Act, which is a Good Samaritan Act, which promotes bystander intervention. So the petition link has been shared in the chat. So please feel free to sign, to share, and share with your network so that we can promote bystander intervention even more. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.